Is it a matter of when and not if Alejandro Garnacho becomes a Chelsea player? That is going to be the focus of today's show because it's a name that simply isn't going away, and Matt Law's piece yesterday, I think, illuminated maybe some of the concerns we've had about Alejandro Garnacho as a potential Chelsea player are seemingly okay. And I think the longer this window goes on, Garnacho doesn't find a home elsewhere and Chelsea's interest continues, you do kind of think there is a high likelihood this still comes to fruition. So as we've discussed before, I think today is a good time to look at Garnacho for and against effectively, because as I've noticed during the course of this summer, when I've talked about potential Chelsea targets and specifically attacking targets, more so Jamie Gittens, Xavi Simons, and particularly ones that would play kind of, I guess, a wider position or an inside forward. And whenever I would add Garnacho into that potential analysis, just comparison, right? Because he was continually being linked. The numbers were never terrible. And as we're going to get into later on today's show, I think people make some very compelling arguments. And there are compelling arguments for why particularly taking a Man United player out of that environment might mean that Garnacho could prove a smart addition. However, to balance things out, I think there are reasons why he may not be a good addition. And I want to leave it to you in the comments below to give me your thoughts, whether you feel positive or negative. So this was the piece by Matt Law in the Telegraph on Thursday afternoon. Chelsea have completed Alejandro Garnacho background checks as summer plans emerged. It's believed that Chelsea are comfortable with the results of their checks and waiting to clinch the outgoings they need and the green light from United to proceed. United's valuation of Garnacho will be key to any deal going ahead. Garnacho's preference is to remain in the Premier League. He has also been linked with Aston Villa, but it's understood he hopes to move to a club that will compete in the Champions League and has made Chelsea his first choice. An overview of Garnacho, his career at Man United. Obviously, we know he plays primarily on the left wing, but can also operate from the right, as he has done a few times for Man United. So overall, 144 appearances for Man United, 26 goals, 22 assists. In the Premier League, out of 93 Premier League appearances, he scored 16 goals and 10 assists. That's over 5,000 minutes for Man United under several head coaches, whether that be Ruben Amorim all the way back to Erik ten Hag. So of course his 23-24 season was basically his breakthrough under Ten Hag, and he scored a massive goal in the FA Cup final, if you remember that shock win. There have been concerns, and these are the big kind of no-nos, I think, about Alejandro Garnacho, and why many people, I think rightly so, are putting up a few red flags and saying, do you really want to bring this potential influence into the dressing room? So as early as 22-23, Erik ten Hag benched him due to concerns over his attitude. He was also criticised for his timekeeping and discipline as a teenager. Obviously, there's been social media stuff, whether that be controversial stuff or things from his family members criticising Man United that have kind of created more of a controversy and drama when things haven't been going well, and that hasn't really helped the case. Obviously, the most recent post being him standing in an Aston Villa shirt with Marcus Rashford on the back during the pre-season, effectively nailing down he's away from Man United. Marcus Rashford is also an outcast at Man United. You know, you don't need to be a great analyst to kind of decipher the message that Garnacho was trying to send there. And although it's clear he has no future at Man United, that still riled people up because did it really need to be made, that photo and that social media post? But in terms of his playing style, we know he's direct. I think at times he can be an explosive player. He's got good speed, good acceleration. He does consistently want to cut onto that right foot. I remember a really good cross he played against Chelsea, funny enough. He's actually had some good moments against Chelsea onto his right foot and crossed the ball against Pochettino, I think it was, for a Scott McTominay header. So at times he can have good end product, can be a decent 1v1 player. But of course there are limitations to his game, or there are things about his game that still concern from a raw point of view that make it, seem like should Chelsea really be paying an expensive fee to try and bring him in. So then we get into the comparisons. This is a direct one between Alejandro Garnacho and Pedro Neto. So in terms of progressive carries, Slightly better than Pedro Neto in 24-25. Dribbles completed, Pedro Neto's better there. Non-penalty goals, Garnacho is also better there, 63.7 to Pedro Neto's 36.1. Non-penalty XG plus expected assists, again, Garnacho comes out on top there. Assists is where Pedro Neto thrives. Key passes also is a better metric. So then I broadened it, actually nailed it down really to just the left side of Chelsea's attack last season. And we're talking about another Man United player in Gittens, Sancho. This obviously is where Garnacho comes out a lot better, because we know one of the biggest criticisms of Sancho is his lack of end product. So this is where Garnacho looks a lot better in terms of progressive carries, dribbles completed, non-penalty goals, non-penalty goals and expected assists, non-penalty XG and expected assists, key passes, crosses completed. He is better than Sancho in every metric there. So if you were just looking at a player to elevate what Sancho did, and this was kind of the theory around Jamie Gittens, but you are talking about Garnacho, a player who's actually played in the Premier League consistently, obviously there's an improvement there. And then I just did a comparison between Gittens and Garnacho, two players. If Garnacho was to arrive at Stamford Bridge this summer, he'd be directly competing with in his favoured role on the left side of Chelsea's attack. And it is, of course, quite even. I think there are values and good things about both players and things they excel at. In terms of Gittens, better for progressive carries, better for dribbles completed, better for non-penalty goals, but it is non-penalty XG and expected assists where Garnacho does thrive, and there's something about that we will discuss. In terms of assists, Gittens is better there. Key passes, Gittens is better. Crosses completed, Garnacho is better as well. Then we get into, I think, some of the best defences and best arguments I've seen put forward for Garnacho becoming a Chelsea player. Expected Chelsea points out here, if you're interested in stats, you should love Alejandro Garnacho. Look at the names Garnacho finds himself in when it comes to adding value and generating good shots. Wirtz, Yamal, Bellingham. All this despite playing in the best league in the world and for a bad team. And then some more numbers from Sabrina here, really delving into Neto and Garnacho. Neto in the top 4, 57% possession team, 0.40 NPXG plus XAG, 32% successful dribbling, 3.5 shot creating actions per 90. Garnacho in the 15th best team with a 53% possession, 0.48 NPXG plus XAG. So again, an improvement. 29% successful dribbling, 3.4 shot creating actions per 90. And ends here saying 25-year-old in Neto versus a 21-year-old. So you can see there is a reason to feel that Garnacho could get better with time. And as people pointed out, and it's kind of whether you're looking at it from a statistical point of view or just a cultural point of view, the environment at Old Trafford has been dreadful for such a long period of time. And it's not, I think, a coincidence that we have seen players move out of the Man United environment and find new life, new energy, and prove themselves to be decent players. Look at, say, Anthony, right? He moves out looking like a pretty useless player at Old Trafford and finds new energy and inspiration for Real Betis. So, of course, leading to him playing pretty terribly against Chelsea in the Conference League final. Scott McTominay is probably the biggest case. I mean, I never thought Scott McTominay was an awful player. I thought he was a very effective player. And I think for him to go and win a Scudetto with Napoli, of course, is a triumph that many people probably wouldn't have seen him doing. But there are examples of players getting out of that environment, the malaise. Marcus Rashford too. I'm very interested to see what Marcus Rashford could do with Barcelona in the upcoming season. I think some people may be surprised with how well he does. Jadon Sancho, I mean, you look at it last season. Jadon Sancho was not a roaring success for Chelsea. I don't think anyone can seriously argue that, but he wasn't a complete failure. He did have some very good moments, and he did have moments that made people feel like actually there is something still here with this player. So Garnacho, if Garnacho was to arrive at Chelsea for a fee, I think, of under 35 million, I think anything over that for me, with the risks you are taking with him that I don't think are irrelevant. Now, I'm not sitting here with the risks and saying Garnacho is going to come into Chelsea and he's going to be so destructive that he's going to destroy everything good that we've seen at Chelsea in recent months. I think what you may get from Garnacho is a Joao Felix situation where he just isn't that good, he isn't that impactful, he doesn't really transform things, and he doesn't remain here that long. I think what you get, a best case scenario from Garnacho from a tactical point of view, and this is something that Fard brought up as kind of an idea against signing Garnacho, but I actually think from a tactical point of view and depth point of view, could be pretty useful in certain situations, is that he doesn't think that Garnacho's profile, considering his strengths and weaknesses, suit what Maresca is trying to do, and that is a transition-heavy team that plays with a lot of intensity and pace when they have the ball, would suit him best, in my opinion. But then you think about how Garnacho could be used in certain scenarios for Chelsea, and the way he's been used at his best in certain scenarios for Man United, in transition games. I mean, you think about the PSG final, right? In games where Chelsea don't have a lot of the ball, but also later on in games where Chelsea, you always got to be thinking about how many tools you have at your disposal from the bench and the ability to change things up, to make things go from feeling stale and kind of slow paced to change and really make the opposition change their strategy. If they are sitting in a low block, Chelsea are finding it very difficult to break them down, and if they keep doing that, they're probably going to get a point or maybe win at the bridge. How are you going to change that momentum? How are you going to change things where they have to start acting differently? And Garnacho, with his intensity and sometimes quite erratic style, could be a decent threat off the bench. So that's kind of putting it from a tactical point of view of why maybe Chelsea are looking at him, and even Maresca looks at him and go, well, actually, I could see later on in the games you start with Gittens and then you move to Garnacho, who maybe isn't quite as good a fit profile-wise as Gittens is. But in certain scenarios, whether be it the opposition or in a game state mode, kind of, let's say if we're holding on to a lead and suddenly there is space to exploit. That was one of my bigger frustrations about Mykhailo Mudryk. I think Mykhailo Mudryk as a threat off the bench, when you've got a defence or a team that are trying to get back into a game against Chelsea, I just never thought his game intelligence was good enough to exploit that more than enough. I think we could have done so much more with Mudryk, and that's a separate case. But I think maybe that's where you could justify Garnacho coming in. There is, from a end product point of view, is he creating chances that Man United players, specifically Rasmus Højlund up top, are simply not burying, because Rasmus Højlund has been pretty much a failure at Man United. And when, I think Nicholas Jackson is a better player than Rasmus Højlund, but, you look at João Pedro now, you look at Cole Palmer. If he moves into a team that suddenly has a better end product at the top of their pitch, a better striker, better players, better harmony, just all round a better functioning club, does he become a better player? And those things in the environment kind of sense get better because he moves into a healthier environment. He moves into a happier environment. Does that make him change the negative things? Because I think that's also something you have to factor in is, United's culture has been so bad for so long. It probably poisons, I think, a lot of players. I think you see players go in there at times, and I'm not saying that everything Garnacho has done and there aren't reasons to be concerned. I think I am concerned. I think at the moment, the nucleus of and what Chelsea have been building is very positive, and I think the mentality shift has been really, really good. And I think what you see is players working selflessly off the ball. I think that performance against PSG doesn't come if you don't have a unified group. It just doesn't happen. The work rate that's needed to exploit a team like PSG, the work rate in that heat as well, in America that we saw, you don't get that if you don't have players working for each other. So you need players coming in who are going to offer that on the pitch. And Garnacho, I think, also from himself has to accept he's walking into an environment where he's going to have to earn trust. He's going to have to earn those minutes. He's going to have to prove himself capable of being trusted by Enzo Maresca, because you are walking into an environment, and I'm not saying that Chelsea have been astonishingly good in the Premier League. You're not walking into the Premier League champions, but you're walking into a team who've got Champions League football, who are miles better than Man United last year, who have young players walking in this window who are going to be competing for minutes. So if he walks in with the arrogance and the entitlement to think, I'm going to walk into this starting 11, not kind of, there is good confidence and there is kind of just delusion, really. He needs to have that about him that isn't going to create problems for Maresca. And being able to work in that environment and prove himself good enough, because it's not going to be alone, I don't think, unless it gets really, really drastic. I mean, maybe Chelsea, from a negotiating point of view, are thinking to themselves, maybe we could get a Sancho sequel here where we drag it out right to deadline day, there's no suitors, and the best you're getting, Man United, is a loan with maybe an obligation to buy, that then actually, a bit like Sancho, somehow turns out Chelsea can get out of if they need to. I think that is where it is. I think it more likely is going to be a permanent deal, but if it can be a permanent deal 35 million under, I think that's a lot better. Mad to me there was ever any suggestion of 60 million. Mad to me. We've already bought a player close to that in Jamie Gittens. We've already spent money elsewhere in that aspect. And with Xavi Simons also likely coming through the door, at least there's an expectation that that deal is moving in a positive direction. Garnacho's name isn't going away. So I just think, listen, we could all sit here and in my perfect transfer window, I'm probably not signing Alejandro Garnacho. Not because there's nothing about him that could prove effective for Chelsea. I just think, why take the risk? And I just, I'd rather give those development minutes to, say, Tyreek George if he stays around. Or, just the bulk of the players we have already, Esteval Willian, for instance, coming in. You think about again, I consistently talk about this. It's not just about Esteval Willian only plays on the right, but like him playing affects other players. Other players affects, how many positions are actually available on the pitch for Chelsea and for Enzo Maresca. But it seems like a deal that Chelsea are intent on doing. So it has to be in the best case possible. And I understand. I wonder what those checks are. There is a reason to be concerned. If you speak to Man United fans, although they're very angry with their club, there are still Man United fans who were kind of happy to see the back of Alejandro Garnacho. So there is reason to feel concerned about that, right? Are you bringing in a player who, when things get tough, isn't going to respond that well? But numbers don't lie. Numbers do paint a picture, and they're not the full picture. I think, of course, character, how players respond to adversity, how they work chemistry-wise with the players around them, and also how they impact things in certain scenarios and under certain pressure. I mean, you're walking in from Man United, who are arguably the biggest club in the world. It's not like he's been in an environment that doesn't have that media pressure. It absolutely does. But is he at a point in his career where he's willing to evolve and get past some of those things? And are those things actually more a symptom and kind of a symbol really of the problems at Old Trafford, rather than a damning indictment of this is who this player is, and no matter where he goes, that's going to be the issue? Because we don't really have tons of evidence of Garnacho going into different environments, do we, really, as a younger player? So I want to hear your thoughts. I think, again, do your own research. I would say, look at Data MB, look at some of the numbers, compare the numbers with certain players. I don't think Garnacho looks that bad. And I think Chicago Dimitri has also he's an advocate for signing Garnacho. And, I think he's made some really good points about that as well. So it's not like people going, wanting to sign Garnacho are just doing it from a place of, I just want to see another signing. I think there is some logical, decent arguments from a statistical point of view. And also, as I brought up, the tactical point of view of how he could be used in a certain scenario. And I think, just everything we're hearing, I would say there is a 80 to 90% chance Garnacho's a Chelsea player by the end of this window. I just think it will happen. I just think it looks, it sounds, it smells, it walks like a move that is going to happen. It's an inevitability. And whether you like that inevitability or not, I think maybe it's coming to the realization that it probably will happen. And we will see. We will see. So those are my thoughts today. Please let me know yours in the comments below. Check out all the content. We had that great convo with the brilliant John McKenzie. If you haven't checked it out already, obviously we await. We know Joel Hatto is basically done at this point, so you can go and check out my content I've done on Hatto. We had the great conversation with at Eredivisie Michael Statham about the player. We've talked about Gerald Hatto in some detail, so we'll see what happens there. And of course, with Xavi Simons, as we get closer day by day to the return of Premier League football. So across the socials, follow at SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again very, very soon. All the best.